Black podcast land is mostly a parade of atrocities. There's a few good joints, a few, but not that many. Shout out to the Grits and Eggs podcast. I'm trying to make that happen soon. I like higher learning a little bit. Shout out to the Poor Minds. Shout out to Jokes on You. There's good entertainment, like knowledge sharing and other stuff happening out there in podcast land in some places. The rest of them, it's like a scene from Mad Max and there's hot garbage everywhere. And then all of a sudden, Marc Lamont Hill just made me realize that maybe things can be better. So if you don't know who Marc Lamont Hill is not an OG talking head. He hasn't been around for that long, but he's a talking head that popped up in various newscasts over the last decade or so. He is a PhD professor at, I believe, Johns Hopkins. My bad, Mark, if I got that wrong. I've also interviewed Mark on my main channel. Interview is on the podcast channel. Mark is a staunch leftist, has voted third party consistently, an anti-Zionist. His anti-Zionism stances cost him his spot on MSNBC, so he's put it on the line. And in this new era of his career, aside from having a dope YouTube channel, he's also been appearing regularly on the Joe Budden podcast. Joe Budden, I feel like, has to have the biggest black or hip-hop oriented podcast out there right now. And it's not as bad as Black Podcast Land can be. They've had some really bad moments, but there's also much worse podcasts out there. And they've had some decent moments, and especially in the fact that they've changed a lot over the years. And, you know, of all the hip-hop related podcasts, they tend to talk music, like actual music more, which I appreciate. But like many in podcast land, they tend to be a haven of what I've termed PINN. Those of you who know me know that PINN, or PIN, stands for Pseudo-Intellectual Negro Nonsense. PIN is a dangerous thing in the black community because it's where intelligent or intelligent sounding black men and women get to say really dumb things, but in an intelligent way, and get away with it because it sounds right. And because they are pseudo-intellectuals and not real intellectuals, they are much more invested in sounding correct than actually being correct. And you already know where this is going. The Joe Budden podcast has one of the most notable PINNs around right now, one Antoine Ish Marby. I think I'm saying his name right, no disrespect if I'm not. And Ish has kind of been the butt boy of Joe Budden for the last year or so, mostly because of him being like this singular hardcore Drake fan. He wasn't like really standing for Drake. He wasn't Mal or whatever the other dude from the old Joe Budden podcast was, but he definitely was struggling with watching Drake lose as handily as he did in that battle. And since then, he's caught his fair share of jokes, maybe even more than his fair share. But in doing that, he's shown that PIN tendency to refuse to be wrong, to refuse some learning from certain experiences. A PIN that makes a mistake presumes the fault of their mistake to be with someone else, while a real intellectual makes a mistake and then self-evaluates on why that mistake has been made. And I don't watch enough Joe Budden podcasts to say this is the case with Ish, but I kind of perceive that to be the case. I won't down that hill though. All that said, I don't want to pick on Ish too much because I think in this case, he's maybe being treated a bit unfairly by the audience because of how he comes off. And it's important to recognize that Ish is a successful businessman and real estate person before the Budden podcast. He's not like a pure barbershop philosopher just saying dumb shit out of his ass. He at least has reason to see himself as an intellectual and as a successful and forward-thinking man. For I understand, he was in corporate America before he got into real estate. I believe he has a degree from Morgan State University, which is a top tier HBCU, probably top 5 among HBCUs. And I can tell you as an HBCU grad that like any university, there's a chance that someone gets their degree without becoming all that knowledgeable. They may know things, but knowing things doesn't necessarily make you an intellectual. Being intellectual means also, along with like knowing stuff, is having critical thinking, doing real research, not just Wikipedia or YouTube or barbershop research, and most importantly, having reflexivity and self-reflection on your learning so that you're using essentially a scientific method towards your own attainment of knowledge versus saying,
I know this thing, and because I know this thing, I can use that knowledge to dominate a space or a conversation,
even if that knowledge is outdated or incorrect. Quick sports analogy to make this make sense. I'm a sports creator now. Y'all saw the Deion Sanders video. Y'all gotta respect my game now. So Bill Belichick, weird freaky frog with a 24-year-old girlfriend. We talked about that on the Twitch channel. I have to leave it alone for now. But along with being a weird freaky frog old man, he's also an extremely overrated coach. Like, I will die on the hill that he's probably the most overrated champion in all of sports history. He is great and knowledgeable as a defensive mind, but he only has the status he has, the rings he has, because he happened to luck upon the greatest quarterback in the history of football. And I hate that I'm saying that. I am an OG Tom Brady hater, but I'm a hater in the true sense in that I'm just jealous of his success. I have no reason to look at Tom Brady, no argument against Tom Brady as the greatest quarterback of all time. And proof of that is the fact that he drugged Bill Belichick's medium coaching, poor team building ass to 6 Super Bowl wins. And we see exactly what happened to Bill Belichick when Tom Brady left. He's out the league now. Whereas Tom Brady, if he wanted to, could come back right now and join the Steelers. Conversely, you have Andy Reid. Goofy insurance commercials aside, Andy Reid, for my money, is the greatest coach in the history of the NFL, mostly because he's made it happen. He's been an elite coach with a multitude of situations. He's been a top-tier coach with elite QBs like Donovan McNabb and Patrick Mahomes, but he's also won with Mike Vick and Alex Smith and Kevin Kolb. And if you don't know ball, you probably don't even remember who Kevin Kolb is. This is because, unlike Belichick, Reid is a student of the game and of the world. Belichick and pseudo-intellectuals have a specific vision of whatever it is they're in, whatever part of the world they inhabit, and they force the world to always fit within that vision. They have no other understanding or framework for understanding things around them. Reid and real intellectuals have a baseline framework that they consistently update and rearrange and evaluate and change based on the data and information around them. So I want to be clear, when I'm calling someone a pseudo-intellectual, I'm not calling them dumb in terms of what they know, but they're dumb in terms of how they engage with what they know and how they engage with what they do not know. Because the reality is that pseudo-intellectualism, as you can see from Ish to, what's the dude name? What's this dude's name? I'm glad Babilla isn't editing this because he'd make fun of me right now. Come on, man. He used to be Iron Man friend, but then he got kicked off because he's a weirdo. I just did a video about this. What is this dude's name? Terrence Howard. All right. The sheer will to force the world into little boxes and categories so you can make sense of it is useful for pursuing material success in the capitalist world. That's why Ish can be as successful as he is. You have people like Terrence Howard who managed to get invited to Harvard or Yale or whatever, clearly not knowing what the fuck he was talking about. Like, that's what pseudo-intellectualism can get you. And again, I don't know Ish, I just know an HBCU hustler bro when I see one. So respect due to that. But what happens when a pseudo-intellectual meets a real intellectual in an environment where they can't browbeat, out-yell, or out-argue people? Things can get real uncomfortable for the pseudo-intellectual, and that's what's been happening to Ish on the Joe Budden podcast. You have Dr. Marc Lamont Hill, a lifelong scholar and researcher, in a space where he low-key normally wouldn't be invited. Sorry to be shady, but there has always been highly intelligent black men from all walks of life, but having scholars like Marc Lamont Hill go from university classroom to podcast couch, that is rare. A lot of these podcasts thrive on not being challenged by real intellectuals, and their audience doesn't want to be challenged in that way either. The handful of people that are hating on Marc Lamont Hill are mostly hating on him because he understands things better than they do, and they don't like how that feels. And I get that to an extent because many, if not most, intellectuals are assholes and condescending and off-putting to certain audiences. So a shouty, not extremely highbrow show like the Joe Budden podcast, which once hosted Kevin Samuels back in the day, having Mark on as a recurring guest is special. And I love that he's entered Black podcast land and he's doing a lot of good work challenging some of the awful opinions that go unchallenged in those spaces. And the result is a man like Ish, an intelligent, successful man who is highly regarded in many rooms he enters, feeling kind of sunned and belittled by someone who is superior to him in this particular venue. You can see it in Ish's posture and the frustration he has that he is presenting ridiculous things like believing the earth is flat as if you've ever argued with a real flat earther, they're not dumb, they're just pseudo-intellectuals. They're actually usually pretty smart, pretty nimble, pretty quick-witted, but this is a practice task that they have. That's a practice task that happens with a lot of pseudo-intellectuals because they love to argue and they get really good at it. The problem is they never learn anything in the process. To them, arguing is just a contest to win, not an opportunity to learn anything. And now that Ish is in a situation where he's being forced to learn, he does not seem to like it. But what's really interesting to me and requires further evaluation and a little tact maybe is Marc's politics and what he embodies, being a leftist, being a male feminist, etc. These are often things that dudes like Ish will disregard outright. Not saying that Ish is red pill, but the types of dudes that are red pill tend to act like Ish. I'm just keeping it a buck with y'all. And those types of dudes watch Joe Budden, but notice how much love Marc Lamont Hill is getting from the general Joe Budden podcast audience, at least for now. Not like during the show the whole time. During the show, Mark plays it cool and coy and isn't like too demonstrative with the fact that he knows way more than everyone else on that couch. A different angle to take on this is shout out to everybody else on the Joe Budden podcast for not being like small-minded and insecure about the fact that they have a real intellectual there. In my personal experience, I feel like I've seen before is that dudes that are used to being the smartest people in the room, that enter rooms specifically to fulfill that role, hate when someone else smarter than them comes in the room and doesn't mind showing the difference. But them dudes are like, yeah, this is dope. We have a difference of opinion. We have somebody that is intellectual and has a lot of knowledge in certain things. And it's not always smooth, but it's way better than like you would have imagined. And part of that does also go to Marc Lamont Hill, who is showing a lot of patience and restraint at times because he's modeling something that I think a lot of progressives and leftists also need to do, which is like learning how to talk to people for the sake of enriching and like spreading knowledge versus dominating and browbeating them and showing them that you're right and they're wrong. And what this shows us is that these men who might seem intractable on certain topics can be reached with the right messenger. My prayer is that a lot of these shouty men podcasts see the success of Joe Budden and try to find other legit scholars to chime in, to kill these echo chambers that these dudes don't realize they're in and burst some bubbles with real knowledge, not just stuff you heard or saw on Instagram or YouTube or Facebook. Because at the end of the day, I don't think Ish got to where he is in life by being dumb. He is an intelligent guy. But the way he argues, the way he's responding to being wrong and being wrong publicly indicates to me, this is just my armchair psychology, that he's not used to being challenged on his ideas, at least not by people who disagree with him and are not going to back down to him based on his status or what he's accomplished in life or an insecurity about what they're saying. It's not every day that you try to argue something with a nigga and the nigga comes back to correct you, not just because he knows something or because he literally wrote a book about the thing you're wrong about in the moment. That's a special internet moment. And I think it's good for everyone. So I am praying that there's more of it. I joked recently that the idea that we need more left-wing podcasts is false, but I don't know, maybe I'm speaking too soon. Maybe we need to have a whole like slew of these bad boys, a whole network of the left-wing soy boy alpha male podcast network. This is why I'm stuck over here. This is why I'm stuck on YouTube. I have no future outside this space. It is what it is. I'm FD Signifier and this has been Light Work.